One of the first ones was chemtrails because you cannot debunk it. It's real.
Groovy.
Easy, Rick. That's dark.
Oh, it gets darker, Morty. Welcome to the darkest year of our adventures.
Yo, fuck nuts. It's probing time.
But you must understand, our interest in their world was purely for the betterment of mankind. Everything has clearly gotten out of hand now, yes. But it was worth the risk, I assure you.
Beware. Conspiracy Hour with the CJH.
Greetings, strange humans, and welcome to another episode of the CJH. And this is Conspiracy Hour. And here's my guest, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, how are you today? My name's Eternal Slaya. I'm the guest on the show for today. CJ and I go way back, actually. We live in the same general area, but we both have very different lines of work. For example, you're a very well-known YouTuber, CJ. You've got a lot of subscribers. You're well-known in the community. You've really outsourced yourself really well. Me, I'm kind of just starting out. I'm just starting out with this whole Twitch streaming stuff, so I don't have very many people on my channel just yet. But I do like to stream every now and again, and, sometimes I say some controversial things while I'm streaming. So I guess me and you are a little bit similar in that respect, that we kind of like to delve into the politics of not just games or shows, but also like real world events too. And that's what I really like about your podcast, CJ. You talk about a combination of different things.
Yes, I certainly try to keep it fresh and new. But today we're going to talk aliens, UFOs, that type of stuff that goes bump in the night. And do you have any alien stories to tell us?
I sure do. It's a very interesting topic. I generally think that there's like a line that you draw between conspiracy theories that people read online and then things that happen in like the real world that we just simply can't explain. And I think that UFOs are the latter rather than the former. So, the Pentagon came out recently saying that they need a committee of people to look into the aerial phenomenon. They don't call them UFOs anymore because, UFO generally makes people think of aliens, and they want it to be as scientific and realistic as they can make it. So now they call the UFOs Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon, or UAPs. I prefer to call them UFOs because personally, there's no technology on Earth like them. So for us to consider it to be anything except for alien, I just don't think that that's accurate, because they've already admitted that no country on this planet has the type of aircraft that's capable of moving the way that we've seen these UFOs moving. How about you, CJ? Do you think that there's intelligent life in the universe?
Oh, for sure. Whether or not it's us in the future or whether or not it's us, I don't know, at some point in the past is up for debate, I suppose.
You don't think that it could be another form of life from a different galaxy?
Well, I think with trillions of planets and stars, there's bound to be life out there.
For certain. And the ingredients for life are probably out there too, in the way that we look at the stars. I love space. I'm sure you love space as much as I do. But one of the things that we recently learned about our galaxy, the Milky Way, it's one of the oldest galaxies ever created. So during the Big Bang, there were a couple of galaxies that were created in the beginning, and the Milky Way was one of the galaxies that was created first. The Andromeda galaxy, that's next door neighbors with us, is actually a little bit older than us by a few million years. But scientists basically were able to date the Milky Way, goes back a lot further, and they've actually identified that it was one of the oldest galaxies. So I almost wonder if we were to look for alien life, we would probably want to look at the older galaxies first rather than the ones that are brand new. Because, life takes a lot of time to evolve and develop. So I think if we're really serious about trying to find intelligent life in the universe, we should be looking at the older galaxies just like ours.
Yes, because light travels further, and whether or not they would still be around, still be alive, is a question we ponder.
Exactly. And if they did live near us, I mean, it wouldn't be hard to find Earth. Like, I personally believe that these beings that are visiting us are definitely from a different world. Like, I'm not sure if they actually are us from the future or not. That's another possibility that I also agree with you on. But if they are another form of life, it doesn't seem unreasonable to me that they would be able to find our world. Because when you think about it, Earth kind of sticks out like a sore thumb. We got all this space debris, you know, floating around us that's pretty easy to spot if you're flying through space. You got like all these radio signals that were literally broadcasting into space. So if there was any intelligent life out there that was within close enough proximity, they could easily pick up on Earth's signal. It wouldn't really be that difficult to find. And one thing in Canada is that we've been noticing a big increase in the number of UFO sightings. People would say that you'd see about one UFO per day. Now it's more like three UFOs per day. That's how many reports are coming in. So since the pandemic, the amount of UFO sightings has gone up. Some people attribute it because we've had more time on our hands to look up at the sky since everybody's been stuck inside. But another possibility is that there's more visitors that are coming to this planet from really far away. It's so serious that the Pentagon created, like I said, their own specific branch that deals very much in this topic. They wouldn't take it seriously unless, of course, it was a real phenomenon. And the reason they're concerned, by the way, CJ, is because they're concerned that aircraft might have a collision with these UFOs at some point. So they want to get to the bottom of where they're coming from or what type of technology is being used here because they're stumped. They really don't know with 100% certainty what it is. They just know that it's happening and it's being reported more and more often. As as of oh, sorry, were you going to say something? Go ahead.
Yes, Papa Cotton is in the chat, and he says Bob Lazar wasn't lying, and Dave Icke is right about everything.
Oh yeah, Dave Vick. I've heard a couple of things about him over the years, and I've heard a lot of different names, like the guy that was doing the Disclosure Project and all those big wig people. Like I agree with some of the things that they're talking about, but there are some things out there that they kind of lose me on. Like, David Icke is one of those people who believes in the reptilian overlord type people that basically rule the world. I'm not saying that there wasn't perhaps at some point in our history different type of people that lived on the world. But I just don't know about those people still living here, or
Yeah.
shapeshifters, or Queen Elizabeth being,
Or
a dinosaur.
yeah, or whether or not they're actually reptiles or just terrible people.
That's another way of looking at it too. Yeah, apparently like the way that like we evolved, some people are just due to the way that they evolved, they are just very self-serving. Like just that was their specific way that they evolved on their path. But again, we're missing a lot of DNA links, so I can't even definitively say for sure like what we descended from. We think that we descended from the Neanderthal, but there is definitely a missing piece of DNA that links human beings to the monkeys, and they're not sure exactly what accelerated our evolution. But some people, like if you watch that Ancient Aliens TV show, they think that that aliens actually changed our DNA and like combined it with some of their DNA
Which is
and with eight.
possible.
No,
I
it's not
mean,
impossible for certain. Like it could be like, you know, the way that a baby's head forms when it's first born is disproportionately larger than its body because we were originally aquatic beings. Like we were originally supposed to give birth to children underwater because, like, if you think about it, childbirth is really painful because the child's head is so disproportionately large, and that's due to gravity. But underwater, gravity affects you differently. So it definitely proves that at some point human beings did originate from the water. There's other factors as well, like the way our skin is, the way that we've evolved. The hiccup. When people have a hiccup, that's because when the first creatures from the sea came out onto the land, they gasped for air, and it basically is like a hiccup because at one point we probably had gills. So eventually we evolved to be more like mammals and walk on the land.
Yeah, especially considering almost half of the Earth is covered in water.
And our bodies, like 90%
Yes.
of human beings are made out of water. So it's not really a stretch to believe that. But what is the stretch is figuring out the missing links in our ancestry. That's something that science just hasn't quite figured it out yet. Same with the UFOs and the alien phenomenon.
Yes.
Now,
And
oh, sorry, what was that?
we as humans certainly like to experiment on other humans, so it's quite possible, another species would have did the same.
Definitely. And who knows, like, if there's other types of worlds out there that we don't know about where things are just an experiment that a very intelligent life form just puts life on a planet and sees how things work out, kind of like a chemistry lab. But no, with the UFOs, I was going to mention that the technology that's used, they don't leave behind any type of residue whatsoever. Like with our airplanes, how we produce condensation and other emissions. We'll get to
They-
that topic on
yes.
in
Another
another
platform.
evening. That'll be an interesting discussion. But no, you know how most of the vehicles that humans use, they use combustion. That means that it requires a push in order to force the energy into that certain to release the energy form. It needs a push. But these UFOs don't produce combustion. They have no radiation. They have no emissions. That probably means that they're pulling. They're using some other force in the universe to move their ships because they don't produce the type of emissions that a rocket would produce. It's almost like these craft that are built are perfect for navigating space, and they leave no residue, and they're able to make angular turns in a way that our aircraft could never do.
Well, humans recently discovered nuclear fusion. I don't know if you read about that. And that could lead to UFOs and how they power and
Right.
move.
Well, I was reading a little bit of something along those lines as well, that scientists were trying to look at electromagnetism for their spaceships because some planets, like our Earth, produce an electromagnetic field. So if you created a ship to be like a giant magnet, you could pull the ship through space by locking onto other planets. And that's probably what these UFOs do already to go through space. They probably lock onto planets and pull themselves toward it. Like it wouldn't be difficult because if a planet's exerting a magnetic force in space, magnetic forces can travel as far as they want. That means that you could always lock onto another planet's magnetic field, no matter the distance. Like you will eventually move. If you move through space, you'll eventually end up near a planet that's exerting a geomagnetic force. So if you have a ship that's built like a magnet and can utilize those forces, you could pull yourself through space without using any type of combustion or wasting any type of energy. And then you'd be able to go really fast too. So that's what they're working on in the next 15 years. They're trying to get that done by 2035 is what I read. Those types of spaceships.
If we survive that long.
Yeah, but that's a whole different can of worms. I mean, I guess if Elon Musk is anything to indicate, we should all feel reassured. Because if Elon Musk takes over Twitter, we'll be saved. But if he finally makes up his mind, that is.
Whether or not we're going to Mars or
Yeah. I've never seen someone with so many scandals. But I'm not a big fan of Bill Gates either. Like I say, if I had to choose between Bill Gates or Elon Musk, I feel that Elon Musk is the lesser of the two evils.
they're the lesser of the lizard people.
The lizard people, exactly. the people that rule the rest of the world. And maybe that's why they're terraforming the planet to make it warmer so that they can actually cope. Because lizards love the hot temperature, right?
Well, they just introduced oxygen into. I read an article today with created oxygen on Mars. I don't know how
Wow.
they did it, but yeah, it was breaking news, I guess.
It's a pretty good sign. If they can get agriculture to work on Mars, they could eventually create an atmosphere. Because really, when you think about it, the atmosphere is just a trade-off. It's oxygen that's produced by the plants, which goes up into the air, and then of course the carbon dioxide that people breathe out gets absorbed by the plants and then turned into oxygen. So really, it makes a lot of sense. That's basically how you start terraforming. You plant a lot of trees, get the vegetation to grow, and then eventually an atmosphere would form, or you'd hope that an atmosphere would form. That's what they're basically hoping for.
Yeah,
One of
it'd
my
be kinda-
concerns, though, with Mars, there's no magnetic field anymore, so I just don't know if they'd be able to provide safety from the sun's exposure. Like, I don't know if you'd be able to live on Mars without a spacesuit, is basically what I'm saying.
It would be kind of funny if there's already alien species up there and we're just interfering with their planet.
It doesn't look very lively, though. Like, you don't see any signs of civilization anywhere. It's
Yeah,
mostly.
unless it's underground.
Oh, that's true too. They could be underground to, hide away from the external radiation. That'd be pretty smart, actually. Given how many cycles of human civilization collapsing and then rebuilding over and over again, who's to say that people didn't have sophisticated technology at one point, but then at one point we just kind of wiped ourselves away and
Yeah,
then
like
forgot
we
how to
always
use
do.
it? Because if you have people that don't know how the technology works, like they don't know how to build it, they just know how to push a couple buttons. Like, do you think that people know how a phone works or how to build a cell phone? Like, we all use cell phones, but do any of us know how the cell phone really works? Like, I'm in IT, man. Like, I got my IT diploma, and I couldn't even tell you with 100%. I couldn't even break it down for you how a phone works. Like, basically, a crystal comes out of the ground, it gets chopped up into itty bitty little pieces, and then the ones that have like a charge is a 1, and ones that don't have a charge is a 0, and those ones and zeros talk to each other and give us information and data, which we use to talk to each other on the phone. Like, how do you explain
That's
that?
pretty trippy.
You can't really explain that at all, but yet that's the technology that we use every day. And who's to say that what they had back in those times, it could have been very sophisticated. We just don't know what it is because we haven't seen it.
Well, didn't they find like a old computer in the ocean?
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
among other things,
but
they
but
had
it, but it's like a primitive computer,
right, right, and they had a
almost like a clock.
celestial, like, yeah, that they had a lot of those back then. Clocks that measured, like, not just the Earth's orbit, but they had a clock that measured the orbits of Mars, Venus, and even Earth's moon. So it's pretty interesting.
Jeffrey Miller says, "Please don't tell me you believe this." CJ.
I
Well,
I read it as believe his, or what was he saying? Believe this? No,
yeah,
what we're
it's
just
probably
talking
just
about.
spelling mistake.
We're just
He,
talking about the planets. I mean,
yeah.
and technology that people probably had back in the day. Like, I know it seems hard to believe that we had technology like that, but
Yeah. I mean,
you know,
technically, when you think about it, a wheel is technology.
and I mean, we had things that don't like science can't explain. They had steel back before steel was even invented. They found in one of the old statues that they dug up, like, because there's these ancient artifacts that archaeologists dig up from random places when they're digging around under the earth, and they found something like a statue that had something inside of it. They took an X-ray and they seen that there was like a little ball inside of the statue. When they opened it up and took the ball out, it was a ball of steel. So the question that science, and it was in there for a couple million years, but steel wasn't invented until the Industrial Revolution. So the question that's stumping scientists and archaeologists is how did steel end up in those time periods? So then people think time travel, then people think aliens. There's all these outlandish theories.
Yeah.
But the most simple theory is usually the one that's correct. Maybe we simply had access to technology that we didn't know about. Maybe we were just more sophisticated than people give us credit for, and that civilization went through periods of falling asleep, waking up, falling asleep, and we lost our technology over the years, only to rediscover it again.
Or there could have been like a opposition on some sort of like how they once believed flat Earth, and then scientists came out with the round Earth theory, and then people opposed that.
Well, yeah, exactly. Like when a new idea is introduced that people aren't familiar with, it can cause a lot of discomfort. And that was especially true for people who were very religious minded at that time, because you had religious scripture that also accepted that the earth was flat and that, the sun moved across the sky rather than, the earth's rotation. Like the ancient people, when they wrote those scriptures, they didn't have that down. They didn't understand the physics, and so they viewed everything as a flat dimensional plane because that was the best that they could understand. Like geometry was kind of new back then too. Like it was Aristotle that invented geometry, mathematics more or less. Like those were all new things to them. So explaining things like a million years, they didn't have a number for a million years. So they said that it was 6 days that God created, the universe. But for all we know, it could have been a much longer period of time. They just don't know. They don't have the word for a million. There was no such a thing back then. You couldn't even count that high. And people living in those days, they couldn't conceptualize other like dimensions of geometry, like what we understand about the universe today, that it's not just a three-dimensional universe, there's other dimensions as well. And the
Well,
more dimensions, yeah.
you mentioned time travel, and if once time travel is introduced, then time would no longer be linear. It would be all pretty much all over the place. If you make a mistake, you go back.
Well, that's just it, right? People think that time is like point A to point B, but that's only if you're measuring relative time. And all time really is you're just measuring the Earth's revolution around the sun. It's not really a real thing. Like time as we understand it versus time as it actually is. A lot of people don't actually really understand what time is. Space time is a word that's put together because space and time occupy a certain region in outer space. So, if you're up on a mountain, they've proven that time actually moves a little bit faster on the mountain than down on the surface of the earth, which is bizarre, right? You'd think that time is a universal concept. It shouldn't matter the elevation or factors such as that. But there are factors that determine the way that time works. A clock in England might show a different time than a clock on an airplane because the clock on the airplane is moving through space time at an incredible speed. So the clock on the airplane is going to be a few minutes earlier than the clock that's standing still, because when you're standing still in space time, time's moving slower. And then when you're moving, it's like the difference between taking an airplane to get down the road to another part of town and then just taking your bike. You're going to arrive faster on the airplane because you're moving through more space time. So
Bailey,
time and space are kind of interconnected in that respect.
Bailey Nixon in the comments mentions butterfly effect, and that's a thing as well. You step on a, a bug in the past, and it changed history.
It's a great movie. It's an interesting concept, but I don't know. It's a bit of a stretch to believe. It's like people who believe that if you step on a spider, it's going to rain tomorrow or something. It's kind of a superstitious thing. But there's people who think that if you go back in time, right, and you change one little detail, like if you took a pencil out of a drawer, or you wrote a letter and put it in somebody's mailbox, that it's going to drastically affect history. But if quantum physics is any indication, the multiverse is already a reality anyway. So every little thing that you change is just going to adapt. Like the universe is just going to adapt. It's not going to cause the space-time continuum to collapse. It'll just create a new reality as it goes along. Because we exist in, for lack of a better term, a multiverse of madness. No pun intended.
Papa Khan in the comments mentions the window of human perception is so small that the idea that there are things in this world we can't see is absolutely certain.
I like that. I like that very much. It's a very stoic thing that Papa Cotton is saying there. He's quoting Socrates in a way. He's basically saying, "I know nothing," and it's a very humbling thing because for everything that we think that we know, there's so much more that we don't know. Like first of all, there's the things that we think that we know. There's the things that we think we don't know, and then there's the things that we don't think that we don't even know because we don't even think that we don't even know because we're not even thinking about that.
Like people are debating right now whether or not the Big Bang Theory is actually a real thing, or whether or not the universe has always been and always will be.
I read that too. Apparently they're shifting their viewpoints on that a bit. Like it used to be a very static event that the Big Bang, it takes place right there, that right there at that time, at that
To
particular
be fair, that was always a
But-
theory as well, right?
Carl Sagan actually did an episode in Cosmos back in the 70s where he even asked the same question that the Hindus were asking, over in India, that in their mythology, the universe recreates itself over and over and over again. Like basically everything exists in a grand cycle, and that the Big Bang is just one of millions of Big Bangs that have already occurred in the past, and that this is just another cycle of the same universe just repeating itself, but a little bit different than the last time. Like
Mandela effect.
Yeah, well, it's the only constant in the universe is change. It's the only thing that we know for certain. The only thing we know for certain is that nothing really stays the same. The only thing we know for certain is that like we don't know everything, and things are subject to change, including our understanding of things. So the theory that the universe doesn't have a finite beginning makes a lot of sense to me. I think that people just try really hard to create dates and times for things that likely don't exist. So the universe probably is like a timeless entity, for lack of a better word. It just keeps on rebirthing itself over and over again whenever it reaches the end of its cycle.
And who's to say it isn't a simulation as well? Like, it could be like a higher power of alien species that is simulating a universe within a universe.
Yeah, some people have said that's about 50-50. Like, you can flip a coin. If it's heads, then we live in a simulated universe, and if it's tails, we don't. One thing that I would be looking out for if this was a simulated universe, I'd be looking for glitches or inconsistencies. Like if you watch the movie The Matrix, there's glitches, there's anomalies that don't quite make sense. That's because The Matrix is a simulated reality, which means that it's going to be full of imperfections. If it's created to simulate the human experience, then it needs to cater to human flaws and like the human condition of suffering.
So that could tie into the whole Mandela effect and how we remember things as well, right?
Some people have said that the way that they recall their memory is different than the reality. I kind of take the Mandela effect with a grain of salt to this day. Like even when I first heard about it, when they first talked about it as early as like 2012 is how early they were talking about the Mandela effect. But like saying things like, Darth Vader, the way I remember in that cutscene, he says, "Luke, I am your father." But that might just be word of mouth, the way people misquote movies or misquote TV shows. Because when you watch the actual clip, he just says, "I am." He says, "No, I am your father." He doesn't actually say, "Luke, I am your father."
And people just pass that down.
Yeah, or they even go a step further and say that Bible quotes changed. But I got a news flash for you. Bible quotes have been changing for thousands of years. Like, if you're alarmed right now that the Bible has changed, oh boy, wait till you find out how many times it's been rewritten. Like,
Or the Berenstain Bears could have just been a misprint.
it could have been a misprint, and I've heard people pronounce it both ways. But if you watch the actual cartoon, like they have the intro song, and the way they say it in the song is the way that I've always pronounced it myself. It was never supposed to be Bernstein; it's Berenstain. I've always heard it that way. I don't know where they got the Stein from. Frankenstein? That's a completely different show.
But uh, to move on, we'll kind of go back in the
You're
way.
right. We did get a little bit off
Atlantis.
topic.
Yes, Atlantis. What do you think of that? Like, do you think that once existed? Was that an alien race living on Earth? What are
More
your
than
thoughts?
likely, it was a mixture of that, like because Atlantis had their own society, and basically, the people who wrote about Atlantis said that it was a highly advanced society. It was written about during the times of Aristotle, so like it was like a myth. But a lot of these cities that were myths or biblical like cities, they end up getting discovered. It's just the ocean currents change. A lot of these cities end up underwater, or with Atlantis, here's something that you might not have considered. What if it's a desert? What if instead of Atlantis being a city that's underwater, what if instead it's actually a desert? For example,
I I
if you go,
saw
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I saw an image of that a while ago. Was it a salt desert? It was a pit, and it
Well,
was like
it would have like the geometry of Atlantis, where they say that there's an inner city, then there's the outer circle, and then there's another circle on the outside. Well, if you look at the Eye of Africa on Google Maps, you can go on Google Earth, just type in the Eye of Africa. It's like a desert place on the Earth. But if you look at the satellite imagery, if you look at it from space, it looks like a city. It looks like a civilization could have lived there. And if what they describe about Atlantis is true, where they had, three types of people living in Atlantis. They had the spiritual elder people who lived in the inner circle. They had like the people who lived outside of the circle, who were basically the middle people between the spiritual leaders and the political people that ruled the Atlantis at the time. So the middle people would go to the spiritual people would give them advice, and then they would pass that advice to the rest of the community and to the political people who were concerned about Atlantis's political interests. But there was a theory that there was an asteroid that was coming to the Earth, and apparently there were Martians involved. And oh, look, there it is. That's it. The Eye of Africa. You're looking at it. So yeah, you can see what I mentioned though. Like that's basically what Atlantis would have looked like back when it was above water. But apparently it suffered from floods, and then it became a desert. But yeah, the asteroids. So they basically, the theory is that Martians from Mars actually came to Atlantis, and that was what caused civilization in Atlantis to collapse because there were different alien species living there, and there's a lot of wars and infighting. But that's all like theoretical stuff. You can't
yeah.
actually prove any of that really
Well,
happened.
I mean, it could have been like Greeks or the Romans,
Oh, exactly, right.
invading.
One thing's for certain, though, Atlantis was talked about quite a lot back in those times, and even though there were a lot of metaphors and symbolism back in those days, there was also a lot of literal places too, like Babylon. Babylon was a place that was supposed to be biblical scripture, but there was a place that they dug up, the ruins of Babylon. There's like all these cities that actually exist out in the real world. Just because you read it in the myth doesn't mean that it wasn't a real place. I'm sure the Garden of Eden might be a real place on Earth too.
Yeah, or
Maybe even
even
Mount
it could be
Olympus.
from Mars. That's a theory as
Imagine.
well.
It's an interesting theory. But yeah, no, Atlantis, I definitely think that it was real. And just like with how we lost our technology, it was because there was like a lack of communication between the spiritual leaders of that time and the rest of the community. And it's, the indigenous people who live here say something similar. They say that people don't live in touch with the spirit of Mother Nature, and because people don't live in that type of mindset, That's why we're seeing all the disasters that we see, because people need to be like looking at things in a more holistic perspective. Like they need to think of things in terms of community rather than me first. This whole me first attitude, this very self-serving attitude. I mean, capitalism in moderation is good, but what we see is not really capitalism. It's a very, very aggressive form of oligarchy. It's an oligarchyism. It's like I wouldn't even call it like for because capitalism you'd have three classes: the rich, the middle, and the poor. But we don't really see that. We see people who are extremely poor and extremely wealthy, and then people who are in the middle tend to fall through the cracks. Like there isn't really anything in between. It's really, really disproportionate. Like owning a house back in the 70s and 80s, you could probably do that. But now, good luck. I mean, they found in Canada you have to make like $100,000 a year if you want to like buy a house and live comfortably. You have to be making an income of at least $100,000 Canadian every year.
Yeah.
So tell me that there isn't a problem with like greed and money. Like there definitely is. There's a huge disconnect. Like how do we value things over the ground beneath our feet kind of thing? Like how did we ever think that taking control of nature like this would not have negative consequences? Like every little thing that we do affects things on a grand scale. So unless we want to suffer the same fate as civilizations like Atlantis or other civilizations where we probably lost our technology, like ancient Egypt, you can't tell me that they didn't have that some kind of technology. They were looking at space. They could see space using the bouncing lights and the sandstone that they had in the pyramids. The sandstone had quartz, and quartz, of course, was a crystal semiconductor, so you could generate electricity. They had all kinds of crazy technology back then, but we lost that over the years. And now the technology we use today is very destructive, very harmful toward the environment. But yet we have these UFOs that don't leave any residue, they don't leave any contamination, and I've done research. I haven't seen a single collision. Like there's not been an airplane and a UFO that ever collided. So the UFOs, if they're out there, they're certainly not threatening us. They're not attacking us. Perhaps they're just spectating to see what we do with our energy and our technology and to see whether we use it to make the world a better place or, destroy ourselves in the process. I
Or
think that's
maybe
what
they're just learning so they can learn their past or even their future. Like learn from our mistakes.
absolutely. I think that that's a large part of it too. Maybe they feel that they can't interfere because they'll either get sucked into our drama and then we'll pull them down with us, or they're concerned that if they help us, we won't learn from our mistakes, and then we'll do the same thing to another planet. We won't actually learn. We'll just keep abusing nature and abusing each other. Like it doesn't surprise me why aliens don't actually want to like talk to us, or maybe they have tried and we just haven't given them the right answer.
Maybe the only people that will talk to them are insane.
Possibly. And it's probably an issue of trust too. Like how can you trust a species that has done all these things to itself? Like you would think, well, if they do this to themselves, how do you think they're going to treat us if we try to negotiate or make a deal or like coexist? But yeah, that's basically how I feel about aliens and technology. Like we had sophisticated technology, and at one point we had a perfect balance where we were living with our technology, but we were also coexisting with nature. So the technology we had wasn't too harmful to nature. But nowadays, the technology that we have is very harmful to nature, and we can't really have it both ways. They talk about, oh, get an electric car, watch your carbon footprint. It's like, do they not realize how many batteries it takes to power an electric car? Where are you going to get those batteries? The ground. Oh, you mean the earth that you're trying to save? Oh, you mean that thing? Oh, yeah, that. Whoops. So much for the, save the
Whoopsie.
world by destroying the world. by digging up more batteries. It's so hypocritical. And then they get on their private jet and they fly from one end of the earth to the other while they are saying, you better watch those emissions, guys. You guys are making a really big mess every time you open your mouths. Every time you turn on your car. You shouldn't idle at a drive-through. If you're idling for longer than 30 seconds at the drive-through, you should just turn your engine off. Meanwhile, they're getting on their private jet from one side of the earth to the other, zigzagging all across province to province, state to state. we really gotta cut down those emissions, guys. We really gotta think about our carbon footprint. What hypocrisy. It's insane.
What do you think of the Sasquatch? Do you think that could possibly be the missing link, the alien, or
it could be Chewbacca. No, honestly, there's some weird creatures that live on this island. I could lend you a book sometime, Weird Creatures in Cape Breton. There's a lot of what you would call monsters, for lack of a better term. Just these bizarre animals that you wouldn't think exist because they're not in like a school book and nobody like sees them in nature. But that doesn't mean that they're not out there. Same with the ocean. Like, we haven't mapped out all of the ocean either. There's a lot of weird creatures under there. There could be things like the megalodon, for example. But things like the Loch Ness Monster or Sasquatch, I'm not 100% sure. I think that there are definitely monsters, though. Like, I don't know if you ever heard about what was it, the devil? It was an animal that they called was it the Texas devil? It wasn't the Tasmanian devil, but it was a devil. It was like a giant bat creature that would like attack people in the fucking highway. Like, they're driving on the car, and they'd see a giant bat like fly directly toward them. And the Jersey Devil. It's called the Jersey Devil. Just like creepy story that people talked about where they were like attacked by a monster on the highway kind of thing. Those stories I believe, but Loch Ness Monster and Sasquatch, I'm a little bit more skeptical.
I had to update the stream over on Odyssey because it was live streaming as Revenge of the Sith
That's hilarious.
gameplay.
Yeah. Well, unless you're planning on telling me the tragic tale of Darth Plagueis the Wise, I think we're okay. I think we're doing
Yeah.
fine. So yeah, I know we ranted about UFOs for most of the night, and that was because I wanted to get the lighthearted conspiracy theories out of the way
Yes.
first. I didn't want to see it canceled if I talked too much about taboo
Susan
topics.
of YouTube will be like, no.
Exactly.
But we could end the YouTube stream, and it'll continue going live over on Odyssey, and we'll talk the more controversial,
That'd be
subjects.
nice. And I'll try to limit it to like about 20 minutes to a half hour, because I'm sure that you got places that you want to be, things you need to do. I'm just trying to, enjoy my weekend, so I have time to give my thoughts on that. But now that we've talked about some of the more lighthearted conspiracies, I'd definitely be down to talk about the more serious stuff, because I've seen you do some conspiracies with other people on the show, but I don't think that you've ever gone to quite as much depth as I'm willing to go with you on some of these theories. Not
so
to
for the YouTube stream, I'm going to end it.
Alrighty. Are we on Odyssey?
It's so confusing. Give me a sec.